Hi, it's Emily from WeveGotEars, and this video tutorial accompanies my 1-inch headband pattern that is available for sale on my website. All the video tutorials are included. They're on YouTube for free. So if you need a little extra help or you're a visual learner, you can follow along on this tutorial to learn how to make a 1-inch headband. Now, this headband can be worn as is, but it is also the basis for my signature WeveGotEars full-size ear pattern. So in order to make the full-size ears, you're going to need to learn how to make a 1-inch headband. So this video will cover the headband only, and there'll be separate videos for the ears, the bows, and the other variations of ears that I will eventually have available for you. So let's get started making our 1-inch headband. So the materials you'll need to gather for your project. One is going to be your fabric. You'll need at least 16 inches of fabric. You'll need a 1-inch plastic headband with no teeth. You're going to need some braid trim for the inside to line the inside of the headband, and it's called woven braid or gimping or woven gimp. It's easy to find in white and black, but you can also find it in almost any color to match exactly with your fabric that you're using. I recommend having a 12 by 18 piece of 2mm thick crafting foam. This obviously is not a full piece, but this helps if you want to make a reusable headband template. It's really easy to cut it out of this. You'll need scissors. You will need something like a pencil, a fabric pencil, a marker, something to mark your template onto your fabric. It's not 100% necessary, but I do really recommend this spray adhesive. Makes things easier, you'll see why. And then obviously, any crafting project is not going to work unless you have a hot glue gun and some hot glue sticks. I personally recommend a high temperature hot glue gun. So you want to cut your pattern from page 1. Page 2 also has the pattern on it for reference. So just cut around this solid black line here with the scissor on it. And here you have half of your pattern, which you have cut on the fold here. Now, I've just now realized that this should be inside the pattern, so you have that as a reference that this end is always going to be the fold. For now, I'm going to manually add it to this one, and I will correct it in the file going forward. So step 2 on page 1 here is going to go over fabric assessment. It's going to go over how much fabric you're going to need for the headband, how much you're going to need if you plan on making a full set of ears to go with the headband, and it's going to go over the way that fabric moves and behaves and stretches as you are using it. You can also download my free fabric glossary from my website, and it tells you a lot more about how fabric behaves, and I also have a corresponding video if you want to learn more about that. If you are a seasoned sewer or crafter and you know how fabric behaves, feel free to skip ahead to the next step. So as far as how much fabric you're going to need for a headband, you'll need a piece of fabric that is at least 16 inches long, because that is how long your pattern is. But one thing to note is that it helps to pay attention to what way the fabric stretches or the grain line of the fabric. For instance, if you are using a woven fabric like this cotton print, most of these novelty prints are woven cotton fabrics, and you can see they do not have a stretch this way or this way, meaning they don't really stretch on the axes like, for instance, a 4-way stretch would. What they do is stretch on the diagonal, and that's called the bias. So when you're making a headband out of woven cotton material, it's a little unwieldy to work with if you don't cut it on the bias, but it's not a make or break deal, right? So if I have a big enough piece of fabric like this, I can take my 16 inches of headband template and I can cut it diagonally on the bias because I have enough fabric to do so. If you are limited to room on your fabric, you can always cut it this way. You can cut it on the grain. It's not the biggest deal. It's just maybe a little more fidgety to work with. As far as other ways that fabrics stretch, you have a 2-way stretch, which means it does not stretch one way, but it stretches the other way. The crushed velvet that I love to work with is a 2-way stretch fabric. The glitz sequins that I love to work with is also a 2-way stretch fabric. You see how not stretching this way, stretching this way. These are my favorite fabrics, the main ones that I use, and the ones I'll probably use in these videos. But you also have fabric that stretches 4 ways. And a lot of this fabric is your really like fancy sequins and a lot of those shiny metallic spandexy type materials that stretch one way and also the other way, and hey, guess what, also on the bias. They stretch all the way around. This is actually pretty handy for a headband because the more pliable the fabric, the easier it is to wrap around the headband. They're a little bit more unwieldy for ears, but there's ways around that. So if you're working with 4-way stretch fabric, it doesn't really matter how you cut your headband. And I would just do it the simplest way, which is a straight line by the edge, like so. But if you are working with 2-way stretch fabric, which is what I mostly do, it is a bit more important how you cut the fabric. You want to cut it on the non-stretch side. So since this side stretches, you do not want to cut the headband along the stretch. Because what happens when you do is if you stretch it out at all, it kind of begins to curl up on the edges, and it makes it really difficult to work with once you start wrapping it around the headband. If you cut it this way, where the non-stretch side flows with the direction of the headband, it's going to make it a lot easier for you. So what you can do is take this template, which is half of your headband, and cut it on the fold, meaning your fabric is folded in half, and you place the fold on the literal fold of the fabric, trace around, and cut it out. Another option, which is personally what I do, makes things a bit easier, is to make yourself a template of the entire headband. This is the one I've been using for literal years, but I'll show you how to make a new one. I use the 12-inch by 18-inch 2mm thick foam, so it's pretty pliable and easy to cut still. And it doesn't have to be perfect or anything, but that way you have something that is a little easier to keep up with than just a little thin piece of paper. So the way I'm going to do it, since I have cut out my entire headband template, is I'm going to have the fabric wrong side up. Then I just trace around here. Like I say on the instructions, it is really good to leave just a little bit of allowance on each end, and that extra little space will help account for the different ways that different fabrics behave, and sometimes they're not as stretchy. You just end up needing a little bit more, and you don't want to figure that out afterwards. And it doesn't matter that you can see this line, because once you cut it out and wrap it around the headband, you will not see it anymore. And that's that. And look, you can see it's not perfect. We have some little edges here. That is not going to be a big deal in the end, and you'll see why. So don't fuss too much about that. Okay, so now it's time to grab your 1-inch headband, your fabric strip, and the spray adhesive if you have it, hot glue if you don't. So I have any amount of weird ways that I go about spraying these headbands, but what I like to do is grab a box or something like that, you know, that you're not going to use anymore, and just put the headband on. I've used gallon water jugs to do this, but usually I have a box lying around. And so what I do is I will take the spray adhesive and I will spray it like this around the box, and always spray them outside or in a very well ventilated area. I usually pop out on my fire escape and spray it, so I'm going to do that right now. Okay, and so I've sprayed a really light coat on there, and I have done so using this motion. Just so you know, that's how I did it. I just did it outside, and I did not take the camera with me. So now we have a sticky headband, so pick it up by the edges here. We can get that out of the way, and now, since the outside is sticky, you're going to take the wrong side or inside part of your fabric and go ahead and stick it to the headband. So, to reiterate, you want the right side of your fabric, in this case the velvety part, to be on the outside of the headband, right? So the wrong side of the fabric is what is going to stick onto the headband, and we're just going to leave that little 1/4 inch extra allowance that we added when we cut it out, and just kind of hold your fabric strip a little bit taut as you roll your headband onto it. Smooth out the top, and you can see, you know, there's a lot of room on this side, there's a little room on this side. That's okay, we're going to trim it up. Now, if you do this with hot glue, you can coat the outside with a little bit of hot glue. Be careful though, because a lot of these fabrics are not very thick. Hot glue's hot. And it can kind of almost get too hot sometimes, and it can kind of seep through the fabric, and sometimes that's visible, and you can get things like glue seepage, which you can see it discolors the fabric, or you can get things like hot glue ridges that don't really ever smooth out because it dried too fast or something like that. That's why I really recommend the spray adhesive. But my trick with hot glue, if you're going to use it, I would just dab here, roll it around, dab here, and maybe a few dabs in between. And the reason that we glue this part of the headband at all comes into play once we add ears to it. As you can imagine, if we have a headband where the fabric is loose here, and then we add ears to it, you're not going to have as stable a connection. So that's why we even glue the outside of the headband. So now I'm going to kind of trim this end a little bit, kind of do the corners like this. And I even like to kind of clean up my lines at this point, and if you can see the outline that you drew when you traced it, I like to cut like just right inside that outline. So that's what I meant when I said you're not even going to see this mark later, because I usually even just get rid of it. Alright, let's move on over to the hot glue. Okay, so here we are at the hot glue step. I also like to have my scissors on hand for this in case I need to trim a little bit. The first step will be securing the ends here. So I put a little dab here on the end, and then I just fold over the edge of that fabric. And now at this point, starting in the middle, I will begin folding in the fabric as I'm gluing it down. So just a little line of glue, folding it down, pressing it a little bit, making sure the glue is adhering on there. And then as far as the edges, just little dots right under the folds, fold them down securely. And now this happens sometimes. You may notice that, for instance, this fold right here actually folds over a little too far. So we can just trim it off. And where you want your seam to be, where the two fabrics meet, you want it to be as close to the middle of your headband as possible. So there's the headband wrapped with your fabric, and the only thing left to do is put the braid lining in the middle. So for this step, I also use hot glue. First of all, sometimes your fabrics and trims and everything are going to fray at the ends. You can cut off with some really sharp fabric scissors. Usually does pretty good. Another thing you can do is take a little lighter and just kind of touch, barely kiss the ends with the flame a little bit. And if you've ever done this with a ribbon, it's working the same way as that. Basically just kind of like melting the threads on the end so they don't continue to fray. This actually works with any synthetic kind of blend of trim or fabric material, ribbon and things like that, thread even. The only thing that it's not going to be a good idea on is something that's 100% cotton. So if you're using like cotton thread, it kind of burns instead of melts, so just watch out for that. So personally, I just keep my trim on the roll or the bolt as I'm doing this, because like with anything else, not every plastic 1-inch headband is created equal. So if you cut it beforehand, you might end up a little short, and then that's too bad, right? So first of all, starting at one end with a dab of glue there at your center seam where your fabrics meet up, and press down the edge of your trim onto the edge of the headband. And what I like to do before the glue dries all the way is kind of press and squeeze. So if you can see this motion, it's a press and a squeeze to the end, and what that does is kind of just folds in this trim onto the hot glue. It makes for a better finish and is less likely that the trim on your headband is going to fray. You can also hit that with a lighter for a second if you want. So moving forward, I think it's easier to hold it like this as I move my way down the inside of the headband. So I put my left thumb here on the place that I just secured, and then I just run strips of hot glue down the center of the headband piece by piece, because you don't want the glue to dry before you get there, right? So put a little bit down and then press your trim down. Press it as you go, and then just repeat until you're at the other end of your headband. Remember how I said those gnarly edges are not going to matter in the end? Well, it's because you're covering them. So on your last piece, make sure you get the very end of the headband with some hot glue as well. And perform the same kind of press and squeeze action that you did at the beginning here. Press, squeeze, and get your sharp scissors. Cut your trim off, being careful not to actually cut the fabric. I do a lot of pressing and squeezing, and then I hit it with the lighter a little bit. Because I used to sell these ears, it was always very important for me to make sure that these things are secure, they're not going to fray and end up looking ratty or anything. So after that, I just kind of go alongside the trim here, and I look for any problem areas where maybe it's lifting up a little bit. I'll hit that with just a bit of hot glue, not too much. You don't want it oozing out the edges. Now this is kind of just a me thing. I'm a perfectionist. This is probably not necessary. And that's one secure, beautiful, finished, wrapped and trimmed headband. Oh, there's my puppy. Don't eat that. You ate it! Don't eat it! Let's shame this puppy real quick. He's trying to eat this hair tie. Oh no, there's another one! Oh my gosh, no, don't eat him! Anyway, that's my cute puppy. It has really nothing to do with any of this, but that's Borko! Hi, Borko! Hi, Borko! I'm so cute! Okay, so now you have a 1-inch headband and it's ready to wear as is, but you can also use it to make some full-size mouse ears. So the 1-inch headband is compatible with what I call my full-size mouse ears, which are just like the standard size mouse ears. This pattern is available on my website as well, along with my bow patterns, and they have video tutorials as well, and those are all on YouTube. And all this information, along with where you can get the supplies and materials needed, will be in the description for this video. I can't wait to see what you all make using my patterns and tutorials. I'm really excited to get these out into the world. Get ready to look like a lot more fun.